Okay, we're in. We're live and we are recording. Hello, everybody. My name is Derek Williams with Tenbound, and I will be your host for this session. I'm happy to announce and first of all, thank everyone for joining. If you've been participating in the previous sessions, I'm sure you're getting a lot of value. So thanks for joining, being part of the Tenbound Revenue Alignment community. And a couple of housekeeping items before I hand the mic over to our moderator. Number one, we are going to be recording these sessions and they will be available after the show is over. So make sure you follow at Tenbound and all the socials so that you can get those notifications when those updates come out. So the recordings will be available. You can check them out if you have missed previous sessions or can't make some of the following up sessions. We do have a Q&A feature on the right side of your screen and a chat feature there. So make sure you check those out. If you'd like to drop a question in, I'll be in the background monitoring the comments and the questions, and we'll help tee those up for our guests here. Real quick note, if you go into full screen, you may not see the chats, so just be aware of that. Other than that, I do want to introduce the topic at hand here. So the topic that we're going to be discussing is learning the voice of customer to increase pipeline. It's a panel discussion, and our speakers first up is Amanda DePaul. She's the demand gen consultant at Conversica. Brooke, Bachesta, she's an XDR enablement manager at Outreach. And then we have Jillian Clancy, our director of sales at LeadIQ. And our moderator for this session is Jonathan Pogact, vice president of marketing at Seamless. So I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan. All yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Derek. Thank you, everybody, for spending the time with us for this session. We're going to talk a little bit about learning the customer voice, the voice of the customer to increase pipeline. And we have an amazing panel here with Jillian, Amanda, Brooke, representing amazing companies like Conversica, Outreach, and LeadIQ. So thank you, everybody. Today, let's just start it off by what do we mean, right? Voice of the customer. We hear that a lot. It's one of those phrases and catch terms that are out there. But what does that mean to you at your particular organization? And how do you implement it where you are today? Start with you, Brooke.
Sure. Yeah, I think, we're just seeing a continued rise in the need for personalization. And if we can, we can't use like cookie cutter scripting or talk tracks for every customer and industry that we call into. And as a high growth company, reps at Outreach are calling into industries like that run the gamut of software startups to mechanical engineering, manufacturing, propane companies, all across the board. But the one thing they have in common is salespeople. So I think when it comes to like learning the voice of your customer, number one is just teach your reps how to have human conversations with business people around what matters to them, and then make a concerted effort to like get to know their business. I guess like if we're defining what voice of the customer means, just means to me meeting your prospects where they are and not trying to like square peg round hole script them to death.
Yeah, right. I think to kind of piggyback on that, I think that it's really like speaking your customer's language. So, the way that like we sell into marketing and sales, obviously, and marketing at sales at a tech company, those folks are going to talk a little bit differently than marketing and sales folks at a manufacturing company. They use their kind of similar lingo, but they might mean different things when they say it. And so just understanding like the context in which somebody is using language, and making sure that you're kind of meeting them where in the place that they're familiar and you're using the right terms in the right context.
I would say too, like the voice of the customer is similar to what Amanda just mentioned. Verbiage is so siloed based on each function. So sales has their own lingo, marketing has their own lingo. And you would think, well, if I go from this B2B company A, and then I'm going to go to this B2B company B, it's going to be the same lingo, right? It's not. It means different things. And so you have to really understand, like intrinsically, who they are, what they're talking about, what they're responsible for. And what I like to think about, one asset I always make when I join a company for teams is really this like persona grid. And so I always isolate like the personas that we're going after, and I have different buckets. And one of them is, what do they care about? So like, what is important to them? What is their day-to-day job? But the other two things that I try to help coach teams to think about are what keeps that person up at night and how does that person get promoted? Because to me, that's like intrinsically understanding the voice of your customer and the language that they speak every day.
Yeah, so it's like meeting them where they're at, having a shared common language and values, but also shared goals, right? Like what you mentioned, Jillian, if you're invested into your customers' success as a company, but also as an individual, you're meeting them at a different level than somebody coming in with a very templated approach. That's awesome. Quick story, my background, I worked at agencies to start my career, the half point of my career, and we worked with higher education institutions. And a lot of the competition were very traditional agencies that came in and they talked about leads, right? They talked about signups, but higher education institutions don't speak in that language. They talk about enrollments and applications, so on and so forth. And we would win deals just by using that shared common language compared to everybody else. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to build trust, right? Authentic trust.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go, Amanda.
I was just going to say, I think there is something to be said, because you will get ahead, like speaking to a demand gen person, it differs from speaking to somebody who deals with events, for example. And so if you are using kind of like the right language and you're like on the right level with another person and you're kind of vibing and you get it, I think that there's a level of trust and credibility that goes with a company, like from the customer's perspective, when it's like, okay, this person clearly understands my world and what I do every day, and they can speak my language. And so therefore, this company is going to seem a whole lot more credible than the people who are using kind of the terms. They're like beating around the bush with the terms, but they're not nailing it. And we're definitely like on different levels right now. I think that goes a really long way for credibility.
100%, Amanda. And I think the other part of that is not only just speaking the language, but understanding like how to create urgency with your prospects. So that if you don't understand what their life looks like or what their role is, like you may have an awesome product, but if you can't attach to an initiative or help them create that sense of urgency, like you're going to continue to get punted. So yeah, just figuring out like what is happening in their life, what's their operating rhythm, what things are they, like you said, what are they worried about, what keeps them up at night? So that they have a reason to chat with you.
It's awesome. And for anybody listening in, if you have questions, use the Q&A to your right. We'll get to them by the end. So I think that's super good feedback. So what are some of the unique strategies that you've implemented? I know the persona mapping, right? Like that's super interesting to think about, especially if you haven't implemented that at your organization. But how did you arrive at that? And what are some of the other unique things that you're doing as sales and marketing leaders to help learn that voice of the customer?
I can start for this. Yeah, I would say the persona mapping, I would say a tool I've found to be so helpful, especially if you have more junior staff that maybe haven't been in the role before. It's a guiding mechanism for them to ask the right questions, know how to start a conversation with particular titles. The other thing too is I think it's really important to make iterations on it. So if you're listening to your customer calls and you're listening to your prospect calls, you should add to it and enhance it based on what they're telling you they care about by their role. I would say the other thing that I've implemented, and we also try to make iterations on, is prospects don't necessarily, yes, they want to know that we're experts in our tool and we know how to solve their problems and we can help them, but they want social proof, right? Like they want to hear from our other customers. I think that's the voice part right there too. Being able to get the stories of your customers and translate them to prospects, translate them to, other customers that may be stuck on a similar challenge. I always try to use the language like, don't take my word for it. I did just explain this to you, but don't take my word for it. Like, here's the proof point of this. Here's the customer story of this. So those are the two things that I try to really always focus on.
Yeah, I think using customer stories is huge. I think also you mentioned listening to calls, and we tap into our customer success team at Converska all the time to understand, because even like different size companies have different problems. And so we really like to sit down with CS and use their kind of perspective, even if it's a customer that we can't necessarily like name drop. Maybe they have a really cute or really cool use case that we can talk about. And at least, again, that gives you kind of the fodder to have that like conversation and that use that lingo and sound like an expert, because you're talking about a real use case from a real customer. And maybe we can't say the customer's name, but at least the story is really good. And so we try to tap CS a lot, probably too much sometimes, to help us put together content for our sales people. And honestly, even from a marketing perspective, like putting together the marketing collateral that supports, obviously sales in their sales endeavors. So.
Yeah, and I think like tactically, especially when it comes to working with SDRs who are often like early in their career, maybe have never had a job before, like forcing some kind of, like in boot camp, we make sure that they are able to retell a customer story, and like they don't need to know all of them, but pick a handful and just be able to tell it in a way that sounds like them, that is organic, is one part of just practicing. The other thing is making sure that there's like data accuracy. It can be very easy, like in the game of telephone, not even just cold calling, but like when you hear something to inadvertently hyperbolize or like misquote something. So making sure that your reps have a really clean data sheet of like, here's the customer that we can reference, here's actually what happened. So that way your reps are like put in a good position to like tell a story and have clean data to go along with it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said too for using, I went away, but maybe
we can hear you.
Okay, good. There's something to be said for using like marketing resources and CS resources to put together like templates and use MarTech to support sales and SDRs in kind of, not necessarily like everything needs to be a script, but hey, like we can build snippets for you, or we can build little stories for you to drop into your outreach that uses the right language, that is in the right context. And here's kind of like, to Jillian's point, like here's a map for how you would use these different kind of little snippets in your outreach or in different conversations, so that you kind of have that stuff at the ready in your arsenal and you're not like caught off guard. And you don't have to think, when you're selling into a bunch of different verticals or a bunch of different lines of business, you don't have to be an expert in everything. You've got kind of like a tool belt full of tools that you can whip out in any moment.
Yeah, so the great thing, go ahead, Julian.
Ooh, sorry, I would say I was going to bring it full circle back to like how that helps with pipeline. And I would say, we always get stuck on deals, right? So, they're dark, or I don't know how to progress this, or this is the feedback that I'm getting. And so it's almost like if you can have these cards that you pull out, there's always a solution. And so like go look for the customer story that can help progress the deal is how I would bring that full circle.
Totally.
And it sounds like these stories are already there, right? Like the snippets from customer success, your marketing team, like this information is being collected every day, right? Your customer success team is likely having dozens, if not hundreds of these conversations per week, right? So getting access to those could be a huge asset that you might not otherwise thought about. One thing very recently, what we started doing probably about 6 months ago or so is, starting to share NPS responses across the organization, like the results from NPS. Super simple, right? We're doing it anyway. We're collecting the responses. NPS is the likeliness that a company or a customer of yours is willing to recommend you to their network, their friends and family, right? And typically, if you add an additional question of why did you score us this way, right? Or follow up with why'd you give us a 10? Why'd you give us a 5, right? Whatever it may be, you get all of these amazing insights around the use case for that particular customer. So just a quick tip, something like NPS responses, G2 survey results, Capterra, so on and so forth. Those use cases, that common language, those pains that you talked about, are already there for the taking. So I did want to bring this back to revenue. How are we making money like that out of this, right? Like at the end of the day, anyone that's listening here, anyone that's going to listen in the future, how are we making money by gleaning all these insights, and how are you putting it into action?
I think as someone who, I'm a demand gen person, so I'm like staring at the funnel all day long, and revenue is obviously like how I am gold. And so I care a lot about that kind of stuff. I think that when you are speaking the right language and you're really climbing into your customers' brains and you're really relating to them, at the end of the day, that deal is going to move faster through the stages, in my experience anyway. And so anytime you can make a deal move any faster is a good thing. It may not necessarily, at the very tippy top of the funnel, do a ton exponentially and extra in volume, but it is going to help, gain traction in an opportunity faster, build credibility faster, build that trust faster, and it moves folks along in their kind of buying journey, I think, in an expedited fashion. I think also from like an outbound prospecting perspective, if you can land that conversation, like nail it out the gate from, outbound cold, then you're going to stand a much better chance of being able to continue that conversation beyond just like your first outreach or your first meeting than if you kind of like, fumble at the goal line with your story.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Amanda, of you need to start with the end in mind and like pick a metric that your specific team actually has influence over. So like an SDR, like probably doesn't make sense to goal them against like number of closed deals or like speed to closing the deal because we're top of funnel. So I think that's super important. And I think the other part is just making sure that your reps know, like, what are we focused on? Because as we all know, what gets measured gets managed. So like for us, we're focused with the SDR team on, we'll know if we're speaking their language, if we're booking more senior level leaders in the department. So like checking in outreach of, are we just out of the meetings that we're booking, how many of them are coming from VPs, director plus level, C-level execs, as opposed to frontline managers? We just know that typically the deals will be larger if we're at a VP or a C-level person. So making sure that reps know that and continuing to incentivize the volume, but just know like, hey, here's the reports that we're looking at. Here's what like we're goaled against, and then sharing those wins or feedback with the team.
I would say too, one of the unique things about, being a startup, having a small team that works cross-departmentally, so like all of our revenue teams really work together every day. We have an ability to say, hey, I'm stuck here because of XYZ. How can you help? And then our customer team can say, oh, I spoke to someone yesterday that had the same exact thing. This is what happened. Here's how I can help you. So I think just bringing it back to revenue and how we can utilize it, it's really just like the communication aspect. And if you're stuck, ask a question, because chances are there's a customer story out there that can help you.
Revenue is the great equalizer, isn't it?
Definitely.
So it sounds like everyone here, we have very aligned teams. We talk to customer success, we talk to marketing and sales regularly, right? What if you're earlier in your career, you're an SDR or marketer earlier in your career, and that's not the case at your organization? How do you make the case to create alignment across those teams? What would your advice be to them?
I would say if the alignment doesn't exist, or if you're early in your career, I think it's just about being able to see the end goal in the bigger picture, right? Either you're early in your career and you want to progress your career, or you're at an early stage company that you want to be really successful. And so I think in both of those scenarios, like if it's my career, you own it. You want to be the expert, go listen to customer calls, go ask your customer team if they can give you examples of specific scenarios, go shadow calls, like listen to them, jump on them live. Kind of you're steering that ship. I would say if a company in general is not doing it, it's one of the easiest ways to win, right? It's almost like a team selling aspect. It's one of the easiest ways to come together and win. It can be hard to mobilize because it's a lot of data. How do you share it? Where does it live? Who owns it? I think if you can find someone that can kind of own disseminating the right information to the right group of people, and then something that Brooke alluded to earlier is we need to get it into the words of the reps, right? Like have them be able to talk about it. So I think that's really important.
I think from a marketing perspective, I've had good luck kind of driving alignment between sales, marketing, and CS by coming up with like campaigns and initiatives that really rely on all three teams working together. So, putting together like a customer advocacy program or even, putting together something light where it's like, hey, we're trying to enable the sales team with customer stories. For example, I need to leverage CS. I need to leverage the marketing fodder that we have to enable the sales team to be able to do that. And so, to make sure that we're all on the same page, like we have to work together to get that done. So I think that putting some kind of like initiative in place or some kind of like campaign or a project in place that relies on all three teams kind of working together, and then sort of, actions speak louder than words, I guess. You've got kind of like a end result and like a real tangible thing at the end that it's like, hey, we all did this together, and now we can like actually measure results and see how that actually impacted the bottom line. I think the more you can do stuff like that, then the kind of proof just kind of comes out, and it drives people wanting to work together more and to stay aligned and to stay in lockstep with each other, because they see that the results come easier when everybody kind of works together.
Totally. And if they have buy-in or ownership in like the creation of the program, I think that's super crucial. So often I'll see like a rep wants to take ownership, or a frontline manager, and they unintentionally just like go rogue and put themselves like, oh, I did this thing on the side and it worked really well with a couple other people. But if you don't already have the buy-in or support of like another department or just a stakeholder at the very least, you're likely to have all that hard work kind of disappear, because it'll just operate in a vacuum. So just making sure, like what Amanda just said, people are bought in, they like what we've come up with, and then you've got clear data to prove the point.
And I think, there's something to be said also for visibility into that data for everybody. So does everyone have the right visibility? Does everyone have the exposure to what is happening? Because I think so often a lot of the misalignment amongst all these teams is just literally like lack of knowledge or lack of awareness that stuff is happening. And so, coming up with either a communication strategy or a dashboard or whatever it may be, and whatever the scenario is, so that everybody is looking at the same thing all the time. I think that's also huge for alignment. Because you're kind of all marching toward the same end goal, and you have the same visibility into how that is progressing.
It's really good. Thematically, right? I think Jillian said it, take action, right? Or I think everyone said it in some way or another. If your organization's not doing it today, if you're not doing it today, if you're earlier in your career, what an opportunity that is, right? To do the work, put in the reps, come up with the insights, be a leader, right? I think that's awesome. One thing, this might even be another session altogether, but like maybe evaluate your goals too, right? Do all departments have a shared understanding of what the goals are for the company? I think that's always huge in any organization, that marketing, sales, CS, et cetera, all have the same shared goals, because then that's an opportunity for you to put the customer at the very center and do the right thing. I have one last good question for you, and then I'll kind of open it up for Q&A. And that is, if you had to give advice on a billboard in sales and marketing city USA, only sales and marketing people live in this city. It's a big billboard too. It's like San Francisco when you're driving into the city and you see them on the hills. What would it say? What advice would you give?
Just work together already, period.
That's clever, Amanda. I like that.
I'm a marketing person. Also, I don't know if I want to live in a city that's only sales and marketing people. That sounds like a really competitive, like scary place to live. Yeah, but I think I would be advertising for harmonious working together.
Yeah, and I don't know if I have as clever of a one-liner as Amanda, but I will double down on, like, I think so often it's so easy to get stuck in these, like, well, I'm doing this thing and marketing is getting in my way and it's so-and-so's fault, but like avoid the finger pointing, because at the end of the day, everybody just wants to make the business run. Like, we're all on the same boat and you all have your own specific areas of focus. So I will +1, Amanda, just work together already.
I would say communicate, listen, and align, which is a different way. It's exactly what Amanda said, but communicate with one another. Like, what don't you have that you need and who can help? Listen to your customer and how can you translate that, and then align with sales and marketing and your leadership team in the company. And
by the way, you could always move a little bit outside of the city and the suburbs and you can commute.
Hang out with some engineers for like
It's always an option. You can live with CS and the engineers if you'd like to.
That sounds better, honestly.
Well, that's awesome. Derek, I'd love to open this up to Q&A if we have any right now. Otherwise, we can just keep on going.
All right. Well, I'm looking at Q&A. I haven't seen any questions come in yet. We have about 5 minutes till the next session, I think, kicks off. So if you want to extend a little bit, I say you guys keep rolling.
Yeah, let's rock and roll. Anyone have questions of that super talented panel here today? We'll ask and answer, or answer anything, ask anything. So Jillian, I want to talk a little bit about personas, because that's always something that's been it's like in the marketing handbook, right? Like Amanda, Brooke, like we all know who personas are, what personas are. And we've probably all seen like various degrees of what personas could and should be like. This might be partly HubSpot's fault, right? There's very clever names for very broad personas, but like, what do you think is a best practice? If you want to put together a persona for your organization to help drive revenue and alignment across the board, like what should that persona look like? And what should the guardrails look like too, so you don't go too crazy?
Yeah, I try to think about it from like a function perspective first. And then I try to think about it from a seniority perspective, because especially outbound teams, we're all probably coaching our teams to take different approaches with different seniorities. And so you want to make sure that they have the resources to do that correctly. So I'll typically look at the function. We'll try to think about, what are their general responsibilities? And then what are the typical titles within that function, typical seniority levels? And then we do the buckets of like, what is their day-to-day? What do they typically care about the most? Like, what are their priorities? What keeps them up and how do they get promoted? And I would say, without going down a rabbit hole, I try to have about 4 to 5 bullets for each of those buckets, because you could write a whole email off of one bullet, basically. And then that way they're really armed to try to start to understand the personas that they're going to be communicating with every day. Does that help?
Perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like the world is wide open when you say the word persona, right? And we've all seen the clever names. So I think that's great actionable advice, Brooke.
Yeah, and I think, definitely agree with pick your roles, and then you can get really granular with seniority, region, industry, whatever. But yeah, in general, like start with the roles. And outside of like what's their day-to-day look like, I think it's really helpful to arm reps with like, what questions should I ask of this person? Because they're gonna have a conversation with them, and if you just spew up like, I think that you do these things all day, and then they're like, okay, now what? And then you have nothing left to ask. Your conversation will be very short, and you likely won't book a meeting. So just arming them with questions, as well as negative consequences for if they're not using your product, what they're like, the pain that they may be feeling. Again, just to create, I guess it's top of mind for me today, but creating urgencies, teaching your reps, how can we light a fire under them that's like relevant and like timely.
Makes sense. Amanda, what should a persona not include?
Ooh, what should it not include? I think sometimes people mix up personas with like company traits. So just because I work in a enterprise company or something as a demand gen person doesn't necessarily mean I am like a curmudgeonly, like enterprisey type person. And so I think like separate, not that everyone in an enterprise is curmudgeon, but I think that you have to separate like the human part. It's almost like you have to put on your B2C hat a little bit. Like everyone is a human person. You are not your company. So like climb into the person, the human person's brain, and not necessarily applying like kind of the stereotypical company level stuff to that individual person.
Makes sense. We have a question from Judy. Series B startup, where all we want to do is work together. Where is a good place to start? Seems like we are working harder, not smarter.
I would love to answer this question because I've been at a lot of Series Bs. And I feel like a lot of times I come in, I've got an ops background and I've managed SDRs and I've kind of built a lot of processes. And I find that when you're kind of at that Series B stage, everybody's running around trying to just do good. Like everyone's just trying to do good. Everyone wants to win. And if you can unite around kind of like a process, like a single process, especially when you're talking about like lead, like marketing and sales process, because I think that once you kind of create like good fundamentals and like good foundation for everyone to kind of rally around, the rest sort of comes because everyone sort of understands what their role is in that process, and things just get a lot easier. Like they get a lot more streamlined, and then you can start like layering in some of this other stuff that we're talking about when we're talking about using customer stories and we're talking about using personas and segmenting and all of this stuff that helps, you know, everyone be more successful in their sales conversations. If everyone's sort of running amok and trying to just do their own kind of thing with the best of intentions, it doesn't work quite as well. And so, yeah, you do end up working really hard. So I would suggest look at your sales and marketing, at least like your process, and then align basically everyone's sort of roles and responsibilities with what stage in that process is each person sort of responsible for.
Yeah, Judy, just from my perspective, and there's a lot of ways to address this, but it's easy to get stuck in busy, especially when you're working for a startup. Like, I'm busy, I've been back-to-backs, and it just becomes never ending. My advice would be to start documenting this if you're not already every day, and try to understand like how much time do you have to work on things that are going to help move the business forward, right? And how aligned is that across departments, and how connected is that with the mission and the goals of the company? And to start doing less of the things that aren't helping you get to that goal. And I think you'll find out very quickly that you could probably take back a lot of your life, to be honest, especially if you're in that busy back-to-back kind of meeting rhythm, which is, again, easy to get stuck in. But I think it's worth documenting and cutting a lot of that out, to be honest. And then one last question: how do you bridge the gap with teams on how to put these assets into practices? It's one thing to provide scripts, video training, courses. It's Mason, he's from Seamless, but it's true though, right? You create all of these assets. Like, how do you get them? How do you get your teams to use them? How do you get alignment? How do you build buy-in?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think a lot of it, we talk at Outreach a lot about manager reinforcement practices. So realizing we leverage this thing called the Kirkpatrick model, but like if you just email your team, hey, here's this new asset, maybe one person will open it, and if it's never talked about again, it will disappear into the ether along with all of your hard work onto creating it. So like there needs to be a communication strategy for like, hey, as a heads up, here's what we're working on, it's going to be awesome, here's how you can use it. Then train people on, here's the thing, here's how you should use it. And then the accountability piece is so huge, of letting people know, like, here's how I will check if you're using it, here's the intended outcome if you're using it, and then like doing some kind of retro. I'm trying not to use the term post-mortem because it sounds so brutal, but a retro on like, we did this thing, how did it work, and getting feedback. Because I think I've certainly done this myself of like, I have this great initiative, I launch it, we talk about it once, and then I'm sorely disappointed a month later when I'm like, oh man, like it just died. And it's because I didn't keep it top of mind. So in short, remind people, keep it top of mind, and then hold them accountable to however you wanted it to be leveraged.
Any other questions? Looks like we're out of questions. Looks like we're also out of time. Brooke, Jillian, Amanda, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully everybody on the session got a ton of value out of this. I know I did, and appreciate you having us at Tenbound.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.